Most prostate advice begins with the organ itself. The prostate is treated as a self-contained unit, something that enlarges, malfunctions, and must therefore be corrected at its own level. Size is measured. Hormones are adjusted. Markers are tracked. From this perspective, the logic appears sound. But this framing already assumes something important. It assumes that the prostate is the origin of the problem, not a responder to forces acting upon it. In complex systems, we learn early that components rarely fail in isolation. When an electric motor overheats, the fault is not always inside the motor. It may lie upstream, in voltage instability, resistance in the line, or a control signal that no longer synchronizes with load. Treating the component alone can appear rational, yet still fail. What if the prostate behaves in a similar way? When advice treats the prostate as an isolated organ, it quietly excludes two large influences: vascular conditions and environmental stress. Blood flow is treated as background. The chemical environment is treated as noise. Yet no tissue functions independently of its supply lines. Especially not dense, metabolically active tissue that relies on continuous micro-level exchange. Function does not begin with structure. It begins with flow. If microcirculation becomes inefficient, oxygen delivery fluctuates. If signaling molecules lose availability, coordination between cells degrades. Metabolism adapts, not to perform optimally, but to conserve. These changes do not announce themselves with visible damage. They appear instead as altered signals. This raises a more uncomfortable question. What if prostate symptoms and PSA changes are not primary events, but downstream effects? In most explanations, PSA rises because the prostate is doing something wrong. Symptoms appear because the organ itself is disordered. But in systems theory, downstream indicators often respond faithfully to upstream disturbances. They do not identify the source, they merely reflect that balance has been lost elsewhere. Nitric oxide is often described narrowly, as a vascular relaxant. But in reality, it behaves more like a coupling signal. It links flow to function. When its availability declines, circulation may still exist, yet effectiveness disappears. Signals arrive late. Exchange becomes uneven. Cells adapt defensively. At that point, the prostate may not be failing. It may be compensating. Environmental stressors complicate this picture further. Some influences do not damage tissue directly. They interfere with signaling pathways, redox balance, and molecular availability. Their effects are subtle, cumulative, and often invisible to organ-focused models. Yet their impact travels through vascular and metabolic networks before it ever localizes. This helps explain a familiar frustration. Why advice that appears correct still fails for some people. If intervention focuses on the organ while the stress originates upstream, the response will be limited. Adjustments may improve markers temporarily, while the underlying imbalance persists. From within the traditional frame, this looks like resistance or variability. From a systems view, it looks expected. None of this invalidates existing prostate-focused advice. It simply questions what that advice leaves out. If symptoms and markers are downstream expressions, then treating them alone cannot resolve the forces shaping them. The more relevant question may not be what is happening inside the prostate, but what conditions the prostate is continuously responding to. Most prostate advice assumes the problem starts in the prostate. The harder question is whether that assumption is always justified. And if it is not, the conversation may need to move upstream, toward flow, signaling, and the environments that quietly govern both.